Okay, I'm going to open the webinar, and it's great to see you all engaging in the chat and to see what an international audience we've got here today. So we're really proud and excited to bring so many people together from all around the world who are all interested in the question, which is central to many teachers' minds: formative assessment, what works and what doesn't. And we're going to be taking a particular look and focus on teacher leadership. But I'm going to start with the housekeeping. So I know that many of you here know about Education International and who we are, but there are some of you who don't. So I'm going to introduce myself. I'm Martin Henry. I'm a research coordinator here at Education International, and we've been working on this teacher leadership and formative assessment project for a couple of years now. It's about a 3-year project with a year setup, a year implementation, and a year where we select the learnings from the various circles that we're involved with, and we turn them into a training module, which we're going to put online. So that will be explained a little bit further as I continue with my introduction. But to start with, Education International is a union of unions. So we're a selection of teacher unions from around the world. And if you're in the teacher union in your country, then you federate to Education International, and we represent those teachers' unions at various fora. We represent 32 million teachers from 179 countries with about 380 odd member organizations. So we are, in fact, a union of unions. And what we know is that education unions know more about what goes in the classroom than anyone else. And we believe that we have the best knowledge and the best understanding of how classroom practice works. We're about teachers, and this webinar is about teachers. We had a webinar a month ago, which was about the research and theoretical framework that this work sits firmly within. This webinar is going to focus on the actual teachers and the work that they do in the classroom. We will be led by, listen to, and remain in the hands of the teachers. And we're really interested and amazed about the work that goes on in classrooms all around the world. Selena, who is going to be facilitating the discussion of the panel, is from our Swiss Learning Circle. She's actually the youngest teacher from that circle. But what struck me about her, as you will hear in the podcast, if you go to our landing page, you will be able to find the podcast, should be up by Friday, and you will hear a discussion with Selena and Monica and our other Swiss colleagues around the questions that came up for that group. But as you will discover, is the way she made a PowerPoint sing in the hands of her students, and the way that innovation and our understanding of innovation and the use of teacher leadership can be shaped by experience. She'll be walking us through the panel today. But first, we ask the question, what do we mean by teacher leadership? David Frost, who is our keynote speaker and will be on after me, we have been working with David for a number of years here now at EI, and he's been an absolute world leader in thinking through and presenting the issue of non-positional teacher leadership. And for me, every teacher is a leader of learning, because as soon as you close the door, the teacher is leading the learning in the classroom. And that's what this project is all about: how students and teachers learn, and how the reflection process that teachers go through and the cycles that they consider about how their students learn are so important to the way that they work. And it's also about, as you learn to reflect and become a reflexive practitioner, that you're able to lead your colleagues in thinking about working in this way. Teacher leadership and teacher agency are also integrally linked, and they are tied up with our notions of the status of teachers, professional autonomy, and the way that this works within a classroom setting. So as a teacher, you have to think through and work out the ways in which you can respond to the learning questions that you're faced with. We've just come from a meeting in Côte d'Ivoire where we saw the work going on with teachers around Côte d'Ivoire in very different circumstances from the situation that teachers are facing in Switzerland. But what struck me is actually how similar the questions are. How are my students learning? What can I do to help them learn better? What pedagogical techniques can I apply? And how might I lead others in that learning? And what do we expect from the future in this work? Well, we expect to be able to involve many systems and many teachers in working in this way, where they work in circles. We've been working here in circles of 10 teachers with 2 facilitators per circle. And those facilitators guide and lead the teachers in asking the questions and supporting each other in solving their problems of practice. Without further ado, I'm going to pass to our first speaker today, David Frost, who is an old friend of Education International and who has been working in this area of mentoring teachers and ensuring teachers have an opportunity to lead for a long time. So without further ado, David, I'm going to pass to you. David Frost.
Okay, hello everybody. David's going to talk in a second. I'm just part of the team, Julie Roberts, part of the HeartsCam team and one of the co-directors. So just to introduce ourselves, so I was part of the beginning of this network. Oh, apologies. I was part of this network back in the infancy in 1999. So the HeartsCam network is an independent charity that's led by teachers and school principals. It's been going for over 20 years, and it grew out of a unique partnership between Cambridge University and Hertfordshire Local Authority, and they set up a master's programme for practicing teachers with Cambridge University in terms of teaching and learning at a time when there wasn't a consistent, coherent language about how to talk about teaching and learning. And part of our discussion is about what does that look like in the classroom, or part of our master's programme was about that. And then over the years, I've seen how the tools that David's developed impact people, classroom teachers year on year on year. And as Martin was saying, it's about enabling teachers to be those agents of change, irrespective of whether they've got a responsibility for leadership or not. And certainly being part of this programme, the EI one with the different countries, it's been great to see people feeling that empowerment. Here we've got the HeartsCam Link facilitator team, and the key people here, as you can see through the list, everybody is a practicing teacher or has got experience in that, or in leadership as well. Now I'm going to hand over to David, who's going to talk you through more about the methodology.
So teacher leadership, my subtitle there, empowering and enabling teachers as agents of change. For us, that's at the core of our conviction as a network. That's what we're seeking to do whenever we can. And my experience is first as a school teacher many years ago, and much more recently as an academic. And I'm very happily retired from being a full-time academic, so I can concentrate on teacher leadership. Non-positional teacher leadership, as Martin mentioned, is what we stand for. We believe that any teacher can be enabled to exercise leadership as long as they have the right kind of support. And if you want to look at one of our books, it's pictured there, go to our website and you'll find it. Some years ago, a colleague, John Bangs, who is part of the Education International team, and I did a little piece of research which led to a report for EI in which we identified a set of principles for policy. And I won't read all these because there isn't time, but let me just focus on the first one. Policy should provide opportunities for teachers to exercise leadership in the development and improvement of practice. And that's really at the heart of this project that we're talking about today. You might want to read the rest of this later on. So the methodology that we've developed over the years, and it really has been developing over many, many years, since 1989, in fact. We've used it in many places in the UK, but also in different countries in the Western Balkans, in Greece, in Portugal and Turkey, more recently, Egypt, Palestine, Morocco, and most successfully, I think, in Kazakhstan. And it's very nice to see colleagues from Kazakhstan present in the webinar today. We have a book out, the Teacher Leadership in Kazakhstan Initiative, which is available in Russian for those who can read in that language. It's key to think about what we mean by leadership. Martin said a few words there earlier on about teacher leadership, but it's crucial, I think, to consider what leadership really is, the practice of it. Not just about having a role, having a title, but it's about being able to take the initiative, set the direction for something, manage the process of change, and influence colleagues. And I suggest that anybody can do that. They might need a little encouragement and extra support, but they can. So it's important that the teacher leadership part of it is important because change simply cannot happen without teachers. The teachers are the people who are at the center of things. They're the only ones that can make a difference. It's their values, their understanding, their skills that make a difference to classroom practice. And of course, it's only the teachers that understand their particular context, their classrooms, their schools. They are the ones who understand what can be done on how it should be done and adapted to their circumstance. So policymakers sometimes think that they can change things, but they can't. There is no switch they can flip to change practice from this to that, because practice has to be developed. That is to say, you start with a problem, a concern. You might know something about what can make a difference. For example, formative assessment practice. You study it. You take a few steps. You reflect on it. You talk to colleagues about it. You collaborate with your colleagues. You try out new practices. You improve these practices over time. And eventually you establish those new practices as normal within your school. That's what I mean by development. I hope that is recognizable to everybody here. So the Learning Circle plays such a key role because it's a group of volunteers where they can talk together, have workshop sessions with the facilitators in that safe space, a safe space for open dialogue, where people can be critical friends to each other and they feel safe to do that. And the facilitators can use the tools that we've been providing for facilitators so that the discussion, the reflection and the planning is scaffolded. It's made easier for people within the workshops. And of course, the facilitators also see people on an individual basis to support them as individuals. So if this works well, and I'm hoping to hear stories today about how this is working well, then the teachers should be able to clarify their concerns, to identify something that they really care about, a focus for their own development work. They should be able to plan a project and then network with other teachers in other learning circles to share practice and learn from each other, and evaluate what they've been doing and document it in the form of their portfolio, eventually to produce a succinct story about what they've done so that the whole world can benefit from these narratives of the change that's taken place. Here's just one example of a story. Jose, a Spanish teacher, been experimented with peer assessment in his classroom. Started by setting a spelling test, got the students to check each other's answers, but he thought it would lead to a discussion about learning, and it didn't. So we tried again. What about asking the students to write a short story. And then he gave them a marking sheet, assessment criteria, things like descriptive language and so on. This helped some, but others didn't understand the criteria. So he asked his colleagues to work with him. He talked to his colleagues and he said, you know, how about if we tried different approaches together? And colleagues, Maria and Miguel, said that they would join in and try different kinds of ways in which to get children involved in explaining learning objectives, using mark schemes to assess each other's work and so on. They kept trying until they really began to make this work. They met, discussed, collected some feedback from students so that they could get an idea of how well things were working. And then Jose wrote a summary of this, and he described what everybody said, the teachers, his colleagues said, about how the students are beginning to engage in enthusiastic dialogue and how their learning seems to have improved. So they concluded that the mark schemes were really helping people to discuss learning objectives and so on. And after a while, they'd collaborated a lot. They said they enjoyed it immensely, and they were going to share this with the rest of the school and really try to establish this as normal practice within the school. So for me, that's a good story about teacher-led change. So I'm hoping today to hear more about the facilitators have been able to use the tools successfully in the learning circles, and they found that satisfying. I do hope I hear that. I hope that participants have felt empowered, enabled to learn about formative assessment and to plan their own projects to develop that practice. I hope that participants have been able to engage in reflection and discussion in their learning circles and plan their projects. I hope participants have been able to collaborate with their colleagues in schools to make these new practices normal within their schools. And I hope that participants are finding that they have stories to tell and that they're getting used to the idea of telling stories about their own attempts to develop this practice. So thank you very much for your attention, and I hope we have a great discussion.
Thanks, David, for that thorough and intriguing look through the area of teacher leadership. You've opened up some questions for us in terms of how we go about putting together a picture. And I will mention the vignettes from Côte d'Ivoire, where the teachers were working through in a very thorough and thoughtful way how they might respond to some of these questions. And you will find that as we get towards the next phase of the project, we're going to be developing a project approach for you, which we will put on our Alma platform, where you will be walked through how to use the tools that David has referred to and given you a glimpse of in a way that enables you to think about running learning circles yourself. Selena is one of the people who's been using these tools and who's been getting engaged in thinking about what she can do with the students in her classroom. And I know Robert's here as well, who is our Swiss academic who has followed the project. We have an academic in each country who looks at how the perspective works within the national context. I have to say that the discussion we had in Switzerland, where the teachers were talking about not giving students marks or grades, but talking about how they could describe what the student knows and what the student can do in relation to explaining to their parents where they were at. And it's something I've quoted both in Brazil, and I see Anna Maria's here today as well, and in Côte d'Ivoire as being a very groundbreaking way of working, and has got us thinking about how formative assessment can become more of a reality in every context. So Selena is going to run the next part of the webinar. And as she's talking and introducing the teachers who are going to speak to you about the work they've been doing, I'd like all of you to be thinking about the questions you can ask of our teachers or of David about how we can work on engaging, thinking through, making sure that formative assessment becomes more important and more thoughtful in our education systems. So, Selena, over to you.
Okay, Martin. Mrs., I like coming to your classes. In every task I do, you always see the things I actually can do, despite my physical impairment and my difficulties in learning. That makes me feel so good, and I start seeing myself like that more and more. And with that statement of a former pupil of mine, I'd like to welcome you all and the other 3 teacher colleagues from all over the world to this webinar. And joining us today will be Rignesh from Malaysia, Ruth from Ghana, and Hunok from South Korea. A very heartfelt welcome. We've heard it twice before from Martin and David. David Frost published an article on the Educational International website on August 1st, talking about and summarizing the teacher-led circles. And one sentence stuck with me quite clearly, and I'm quoting now: "We want to empower the participating teachers and enable them to become agents of change." End of quote. Agents of change. Me, as a single person, I can't change the long-standing practices of assessing pupils in my country, let alone globally. But we teachers can be all agents of change and start in our classrooms, then get more people from our school, from our village, town on board, and try and spread and encourage change in assessing pupils and students. With a heart full of pride for my former pupil that I mentioned just earlier, I believe that my formative assessing practices have had a somewhat changing character. And with that, I am now talking about promising practices that I have been using in my classroom. I can group my assessing practices in 3 categories: kids assessing kids, kids assessing themselves, and me as a teacher assessing my kids. For all 3 versions, I vary between oral, visual, for example, non-verbal or with pictures, or some form of digital formative assessment. So most times those assessments are well thought through beforehand, but as we all know, teaching doesn't always go as planned. So it can be a spontaneous, short 5-finger feedback or a seatmate peer feedback to end a lesson or just to interject the learning process. Martin and David just mentioned that they're very looking forward to hearing from us and from teachers all around the world how those formative assessments could look like. And in the next part, I would just like you to give 3 things or 3 ideas I practice in my teaching. The first one is an oral formative assessment led by me as a teacher. More or less every half term, I have a talk with each pupil of mine, and for me, that's around 20 kids. This conversation has a coaching character. It seldomly is like any other. The pupil and I talk about their personal goals, their struggles they've been working on, or whatever new strengths they gained. And as a teacher, I take some notes so I can refer to bespoken things like half a year later on. And over the course of 3 years that the kids are with me, I and potentially the parents have an overview of their abilities and the kids' development in either a school subject or in social related topics. Another one is a digital formative assessment, also led by me, and this is the one that Martin mentioned in his opening statement. We're here in Switzerland. We're fortunate enough to have running hardware devices for the kids, and for me, therefore, is working with Microsoft Office often a given. Let me give you an example. When we're writing stories, if I prepare an interactive worksheet, which is handed out via Microsoft OneNote and Microsoft Teams, And there the kids can digitally fill in and write their story. I, on the other hand, I instantly see their progress, their struggles, and even their proficiency level. I have the chance to help them rewrite certain parts, or I can support them with leading questions by simply adding a sentence to their document. And from my point of view, this doesn't create a fuss or a disturbance, while the others hopefully are fully committed to their work. Not that this works all the time in my classroom. And a third option is kids assessing kids with visual help. With my last 6th graders, I worked on a project for kindergarteners. My pupils had to choose a picture book suitable for younger kids. Then they digitalized and edited pictures, put them into a PowerPoint presentation, and then recorded the audio. When done, they converted the full presentation into a video, which was individually presented to a close by kindergarten. And those kids obviously couldn't write, so we handed them different pictures, so they were supported in giving the feedback. So in all, I use these different versions of visual, oral, and digital forms of assessing people formatively. And to summarize this short insight, all in all, I think that the project itself handed me the confidence to carry on, to be reassured that there are other teachers working on progressing formative assessment too, and just to be a small agent of change. And with that, I'm very looking forward to hearing stories from all over the world, and I'm giving it all back to Malaysia. It must be somewhat in the evening there, and I welcome Vignesh from Malaysia to speak just now.
Thank you, Selina. I'm just sharing the screen now. Okay, thank you, Selina. And also thank you, EI, for this opportunity. I'm Vignesh here representing the Malaysia Learning Circle. And my project focuses on using digital storytelling as a formative assessment tool to assess my pupils' speaking skills. I will start off by presenting on the assessment practices and tools that I've used in my project. The first strategy is Think, Pair, Share. And I'll be assessing my pupils on their I'll be using an observation form to assess my pupil as a whole. The next strategy is simulation, where my pupils will be using a digital storytelling app called Toontastic 3D to create digital stories. And finally, I'll be using a performance standard and an oral rating scale to assess my pupils' speaking skills individually based on their digital stories. Now, let me share with you how did I carry out my FA in my classroom. The first step is familiarizing my students with every assessment strategy and the tool used, especially the usage of the Toontastic 3D app. Next, I'll be explaining the speaking task. This is a sample speaking task where pupils need to work in group, create a story based on innovating a product. The next step is creating stage. Now, this is where my students work together in group to create their digital stories. They'll be sharing and also helping one another. This is where Think, Pair, Share occurs. And not only I'm assessing my pupils in groups, I'm also gaining feedbacks on pupils' learning needs. Now, let me give you some few examples. If you look at the sample remarks here, my pupils in group 1, all of them were able to interact actively. They were able to voice out their opinion confidently too. Whereas my pupils in group 2 were quite weak and they require constant assistance and feedback from me. It was a bit time consuming too. So all these feedbacks and input helped me as an educator to improve on my action plan and also my assessment strategy, which can cater the learning needs of every pupil in my classroom. The final step is analyzing stage. Now, this is where I'll assess my pupils' speaking skills individually and provide feedbacks to them. If you look at this stage, not only am I providing feedbacks to my pupils, they are also self-assessing themselves. The digital story here plays an important role. it is able to let pupils to see and also learn, give them a vivid picture and understanding on the speaking aspect that they need to improve in the upcoming speaking lesson. It actually acts as an indirect feedback giver, and it plays a very important role and tools in our assessment stage. Now, this is a sample feedback I've given them based on the performance standard. As you can see, I've rated the student band 4, stating that she was able to clearly speak of her idea, yet she still needs to be more confident when she's speaking. If you look at the performance standard, not much feedback is given on pupils' speaking skills. So that is why I've decided to use an oral rating scale. In this way, I'm able to provide an in-depth feedback on every aspect of pupils' speaking skills, such as pronunciation, fluency, and comprehension. Let us look at one aspect of the speaking skill, such as pronunciation. I'll be able to show the pupils that I understand what the pupils try to say, but she was having some pronunciation problem. This is where the digital stories come in. Since I have the evidence, I'll be able to show the student the part that they need to improve in the next lesson. Now, all this feedback is sufficient for elementary students to improve and develop on their speaking skills. So how has this project helped me to use my leadership skill to develop promising FA practice in my classroom? There are 6 main points that I wish to state here. Number 1, an opportunity for my student to self-assess themselves. Number 2, I'll be able to facilitate learning and assess my student based on the specific topic and perspective which I want. Number 3, I can use suitable checklists and rubrics which suits my student and provide them with meaningful self-reflection and feedback. Number 4, I'll be able to create a meaningful learning experience for all my passive learners and also my active learners. Number 5, not only I'm helping pupils to improve on their speaking skill, I'm enhancing my own teaching repertoire. And finally, which is the most important part, is I'll be able to create an environment where people feel safe, comfortable, and also working together to complete the task and also to improve themselves. So that's all from me, Selina. Thank you.
Thank you, Vignesh. It's very nice to see that you actually work very similar to as I do in Switzerland, and you still being so far away from where I live, or the other way around. Can you tell me something about, you mentioned some parts are quite time consuming, and I find this is the point where other teachers struggle to get themselves into it or just take the leap and try something. How did teachers in your school react to that, what you just said, when you presented your idea? How did they react?
Okay, Selina. In Malaysia, pupils are actually not allowed to bring their mobile device to school. So it is something new because I feel it can actually help pupils to speak and learn to speak better. So it does take time. I need to show them, I need to provide them the evidence that it can be done. When usually teachers will give up because it's consuming a lot of time. So what I will portray to them that is you can actually carry it out slowly. You can actually adapt your action plan, and students learn quickly. Nowadays, students, when you ask them to do anything about technology, they can learn quickly. So usually during the familiarization stage, it will take a lot of time. But as time goes on, it won't be a problem. Like for my class, within 30 minutes, they can create the digital stories.
The other teachers like that?
Yeah, I did involve the other teachers, showing them how to carry out the stage. But as usual, we need to push them a bit because it's a bit of stepping off their comfort zone away from the conventional method, because it involves technology and it does take time if you want to familiarize everyone with this method.
Thank you very much for your answer. Now we're moving to another continent. Okay, so let's hear from Hainak first. She's from South Korea, a bit closer to Malaysia then. Happy to hear your thoughts on formative assessment.
Can I start? Okay. Hello, my name is Hyunho Go, but I will speak in Korean from now on. 안녕하세요. 저는 이번 프로젝트에서 let me show you my PowerPoint. Okay, good. Okay. 안녕하세요. 저는 이번 프로젝트에서 전라북도 지역 발표자로 참가한 퍼실러테이터 오현욱입니다. 오늘 웨비나는 프로젝트에 참가한 선생님들의 형성평가 실제 경험을 나누는 자리로 알고 있습니다. 하지만 안타깝게도 저는 참여자가 아니라 퍼실러테이터입니다. 한국에도 이 자리에서 발표하실 훌륭한 선생님들이 많지만 여러 가지 개인적인 사정들이 있으셔서 오늘은 제가 발표를 하게 되었습니다. 오늘 발표할 내용은 우리 지역의 선생님들께서 실행한 형성평가에 대한 내용을 간접적으로나마 전할 것이며 이번 프로젝트를 진행하면서 느꼈던 이 프로젝트의 장점과 단점에 대해서 말씀드리려고 합니다. 발표에 앞서 오늘 저의 발표는 오롯이 저와 제가 속한 지역에 대한 이야기며 한국의 다른 지역은 저와 다른 생각을 가질 수 있음을 밝혀드립니다. 첫 번째로 이번 프로젝트에 참여하신 선생님들께서 교실에서 사용한 형성평가 실행에 대해서 말씀드리겠습니다. 저희 전북팀에서는 형성평가 방법으로 자기평가, 포트폴리오, 수업 후 한두 문장으로 요약하기, 출구 패스 사용하기, 퀴즈 등이 있었습니다. 각각의 방법은 워크숍을 진행하면서 시행착오를 거치고 서로 경험을 나누면서 발전했습니다. 예를 하나 들어드리겠습니다. 한 참가자 선생님은 수학 수업에서 형성평가로 퀴즈를 풀 때마다 학생들의 수준 차이가 고민이셨습니다. 아이들의 학습 정도를 확인하기 위해 퀴즈를 내면 어떤 아이는 빨리 풀고 어떤 아이는 주어진 시간 내에 풀지 못하는 거죠. 선생님이 문제를 풀지 못하는 아이에게 설명을 하는 동안 빨리 푼 아이들은 교실에서 계속 떠들고 장난을 쳤습니다. 이 문제를 해결하기 위해 선생님께서는 이미 학습 목표에 도달한 학생들에게 추가로 심화 활동을 준비해서 그 학생들의 수학 능력을 강화하였고 부족한 학생들에게는 개별적으로 피드백을 주는 시간을 확보했습니다. 또한 퀴즈를 단계별로 준비해서 아이가 어느 정도의 수준에 있는지 파악해서 피드백함으로써 아이들의 수학 실력이 향상되었을 뿐만 아니라 수업 참여도도 높아졌습니다. 사진을 보시면 이렇게 3단계에서 4단계로, 5단계로 발전하는 것을 볼 수 있습니다. 우리 팀에는 비슷한 형성평가 방법을 사용하는 분들이 계신데 자기평가의 방법의 하나인 수업 후 한 문장 쓰기입니다. 우 선생님은 워크숍에서 자신들의 수업이 사용한 방법에 대해 이야기를 나누었고 그 중 한 선생님은 방법을 바꾸어서 아이들의 학습 능력이 향상되는 것을 관찰했습니다. 그 선생님은 처음에 한 문장 쓰기를 할 때 과목과 상관없이 시간표대로 한 문장 쓰기를 했습니다. 예를 들어 1교시 국어 한 문장, 2교시 수학 한 문장, 3교시 사회 한 문장 이렇게요. 이 방법은 아이들이 그 시간에 배운 내용을 요약하며 이해도를 확인하는 데는 도움이 됐지만 그 다음 시간에 이전에 배운 내용을 확인시키기는 어려웠습니다. 이 선생님은 자기와 비슷하게 형성평가 방법을 사용하는 다른 선생님들의 사례를 도움받아서 과목별 한 문장 쓰기로 방법을 바꿨습니다. 그랬더니 학생들은 이전 시간에 배운 내용을 쉽게 확인할 수 있었고 그 과목에 대한 전체적인 내용을 학생들이 수시로 확인할 수 있었습니다. 이외에도 좋은 사례가 많지만 시간 관계상 2가지 사례만 말씀드렸습니다. 이렇게 우리는 각자의 교실에서 형성평가를 실행하였고 함께 모여서 고민을 나누고 성장하고 있습니다. 다음은 이번 프로젝트의 장점과 단점에 대해 말씀드리겠습니다. 이번 프로젝트를 진행하면서 우리 지역 참가자 선생님들은 한국에서 일반적으로 진행하는 평가 프로젝트와 많이 다르다는 이야기를 나눴습니다. 한국에서 진행되는 프로젝트는 대부분 빠른 시간 내에 진행되며 회기나 평가지 같은 결과물을 만들어내야 한다는 압박감이 있습니다. 하지만 이번 국제 형성평가 프로젝트는 세션과 튜토리얼을 참여하는 교사가 자신의 형성평가에 대해 집중할 수 있다는 점, 다른 참여자들과 충분히 이야기를 나눌 수 있다는 점, 그리고 좋은 결과를 내야 한다는 부담감 없이 프로젝트를 진행할 수 있다는 점에서 참여자 선생님들은 이번 프로젝트에 참여하면서 매우 만족했습니다. 또한 참여자나 퍼실러테이터에게 자세한 매뉴얼을 제공함으로써 단계적으로 진행하면서 다양한 관점에서 고민해 볼 기회를 가진 것도 이 프로젝트의 큰 장점입니다. 하지만 이 프로젝트를 진행하면서 어려운 점도 있었습니다. 첫째로 교사의 리더십에 대한 부분이었습니다. 프로젝트 참여 선생님들 중에서 학교에서 리더로서의 역할을 이미 하고 계신 분들이 계신데 이분들은 자신의 학교에서 동료 교사들에게 이 프로젝트를 함께 하자고 제안하고 동료 교사의 참여를 이끌어내기도 했습니다. 하지만 교직 경험이 적은 선생님이나 올해 학교를 옮겨서 적응하는 선생님들은 동료 교사들의 참여를 이끌어내는 리더십을 발휘하기가 힘들었습니다. 이전 학교에서 리더로서의 역할을 잘하던 선생님도 새로 학교를 옮긴 후에는 동료 교사와의 레포가 형성되지 않아 프로젝트 초반의 리더십에 대해 어려워하는 모습도 보였습니다. 이 문제에 대해서는 저희가 앞으로 좀 더 깊게 논의해 보아야 한다고 생각합니다. 2번째로 어려웠던 점은 이 문제는 한국 사례에 있었던 문제인데요. 한국에서는 이번 프로젝트를 한 학교 내에서 선생님들의 형성평가 실행이 아니라 여러 학교의 선생님들이 각자 학교에서 형성평가를 진행했습니다. 그러다 보니 이 프로젝트를 진행하는 힘이 오롯이 개인의 몫이어야 한다는 점이었습니다. 한 달에 한 번 정도 진행하는 워크숍과 튜토리얼은 수시로 자신의 수업을 성찰하기에는 부족한 부분이 있었습니다. 이 프로젝트의 목표처럼 교사의 형성평가에 대한 리더십을 키우기 위해서는 동료 교사와 수시로 자신의 수업과 형성평가에 대해 이야기를 나누어야 하는데 여러 학교에서 실행하다 보니까 소통의 기회가 많지 않았다는 점이 아쉬웠습니다. 이 문제를 극복하기 위해 참여자가 궁금한 점이 있었을 때는 퍼실러테이트에게 전화를 걸거나 다른 참여자에게 연락해서 자신의 상황을 이야기하곤 했습니다. 우리 전북팀은 이번 프로젝트를 통해 자신의 수업과 평가를 좀 더 자세히 되돌아보고 다른 참여자와 사례를 나누며 성장하고 있습니다. 이번 프로젝트가 결코 쉬운 과정은 아니지만 교사로서 자신을 한 단계 성장시키는 데 도움이 되도록 서로 노력하고 응원하고 있다고 자신 있게 말씀드릴 수 있습니다. 이상으로 한국사를 말씀드렸습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for that very insightful view from South Korea. Just because I'm very personally interested in, you were talking about the first project you tried or you did is differentiate between different levels and different between different proficiency levels with the kids. How did the kids react when you implemented that new thinking or that new way of teaching?
제가 그 선생님은 아니기 때문에 제가 전달만 해드리겠습니다. 그 선생님하고 저는 자주 전화 통화를 했었는데, 그 선생님은 초등학교 1학년 수학을 가르치는 선생님이었습니다. 수학을 가르쳤어요. 반 아이들이 수준 차가 많이 커서 선생님이 처음에 고민을 하다가 선생님 스스로 아이들 수준에 맞는 평가지를 개발을 하게 되었고, 그 개발을 하는 동안 선생님이 시간이 너무 많이 소모가 돼서 처음에는 힘들어했습니다. 하지만 시간이 지나면서 아이들도 이 시스템에 적응을 하였고, 선생님도 가르치는 방법이 향상이 되면서 지금은 아이들의 수학 실력이 많이 향상되었다고 이 방법에 대해서 굉장히 만족하고 계십니다.
Thank you. And Martin, do you know whether we got Ruth back or not?
I believe Ruth is back online. If we could give her a chance, Selena, hopefully the
Yes.
Wi-Fi is okay.
So, hi Ruth, welcome back. We would love to hear from your point of view from the continent of Africa, from Ghana, what you found interesting and what you've learned in this project so far.
All right. So formative assessment practices focus on understanding student progress and the learning needs during the learning process. So examples of some of the formative practices that I use in the classroom are observation, questioning, classroom discussion, and many more. And I said again that promising formative assessment practices in the classroom are designed to support student learning by providing them with timely feedback, identifying their areas for improvement, and guiding instructional decision. These are some of the characteristics of formative assessment practices that I discovered when I was using the learning circles. In my classroom, I established clear learning objectives and communicate them to my learners. My formative assessments are aligned with my objectives, ensuring a focused approach to learners' learning. Again, the feedback I provide to learners is timely, specific, and actionable. It always highlights what I did well, areas for improvement, and guidance on how to improve. This feedback loop is essential for learners' growth. My learners are actively involved in assessment process. They understand the learning goals, criteria for success, and I always encourage them to self-assess and set goals for their own learning. I also use variety of assessment methods, such as discussions, think, pair, share, projects, peer evaluations, observations, and any others to gather comprehensive understanding of my learners in the classroom. The different methods I use provide a holistic view of my learners' ability. The formative assessment has helped me to identify diverse learning needs within the classroom. So I tailor my instructions to accommodate these differences ensuring that every student receives appropriate support. I collaborate with my colleagues to share effective formative assessment strategies, and we learn from each other. I have realized that professional development and peer learning enhance the quality of formative assessment practices in the classroom. Hence, I say that promising formative assessment practices has created a dynamic learning environment where my learners are actively engaged, they are continuously supported, and empowered to take charge of their own learning. How the Learning Cycles project has given me the autonomy to use my learning skills to develop promising formative assessment practices in my classroom. I know that a teacher leader should have the capacity to influence. A teacher leader should guide, and a teacher leader should support colleagues and the broader educational community to improve teaching and learning. These are what I realized. Through this, I established regular feedback loops with students, providing them with constructive feedback based on formative assessment. I also encourage self-assessment and goal setting to promote a growth mindset. I have introduced innovative assessment tools and techniques, such as the digital reading apps or interactive quizzes that are tailored to the needs of the struggling readers. My experimentation with new methods has yielded valuable insights. I have also implemented different systems to track the students' progress over time. I regularly assess and adjust interventions based on the formative assessment results, ensuring a dynamic and responsive approach to teaching. I constantly engage parents by sharing assessment results and strategies to support their children's reading and development. I also provide resources and guidance for home-based interventions. In conclusion, I would say that teacher leadership for formative assessment involves educators taking an active role in shaping assessment practices within their schools and the classroom. It means teachers not only use formative assessment effectively, but also collaborate with colleagues to enhance the overall assessment culture. In essence, teacher leadership assessment promotes a culture of continuous improvement, which assessments are seen as valuable tools for enhancing teaching and learning rather than mere evaluation. Thank you, Medasi.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I keep on thinking about you talking about self-assessment and all the things you just shared with us. My question for you is, do you find your students to be less competitive or less comparing to each other with your formative assessment strategies?
Can you please come again, please?
I can see that my students are quite competitive when I somewhat normally assess them. With formative assessment, I wonder whether you can see somewhat a less competitive or less comparing environment in your classroom.
Okay, all right. So with the use of the formative assessments, there is I don't see less competitive. It's more, it's working more. All the children are trying, they are coming up with their best. And so it's not less competitive, it's rather more, yes, because they always struggle to come up.
Okay, well, let's do then. I'm happy to read questions you have in the chat or try to direct those questions you have to whoever they belong to. So feel free to speak or write.
Hola, hola Martín, hola Celina, mucho
Hola.
gusto saludarlos a todos. Me parece extraordinario, como dice Celina, que aún estando en lugares tan diversos como Suiza, Malasia, Ghana, tenemos muchas coincidencias en cómo se evalúa cuando se hace de manera formativa por rúbricas, en observaciones, los diarios de clase. En México ahora se está instrumentando a través de una nueva política educativa que los maestros hagan este tipo de evaluación formativa en todos los niveles educativos en los que tenemos. La pregunta concreta para Celina y para David es cómo promover el liderazgo entre los docentes en estos círculos de aprendizaje. Acá los maestros en las escuelas les llamamos consejos técnicos y se hacen una vez por mes. Pero ¿cómo promover, Celina y David, cómo promover el liderazgo entre los docentes para que se puedan compartir esas experiencias de evaluación? Porque no es algo que comúnmente se realizaba en la escuela, es decir, se hacían más exámenes, más preguntas y no tanto la evaluación formativa. Hoy, al ser una política educativa, tiene que implementarse. ¿Cómo promovieron ustedes el liderazgo entre los docentes o entre los mismos alumnos para promover la evaluación formativa? Gracias.
Very happy that you asked that, because that has been something I've been struggling with it too. What I've learned over the last few months and years is that I'm happy to work with those teachers that are willing to change, to be an agent of change, and to try and make small differences in a very set system. And those two that are working with me, they're listening here now. Thank you for participating and being a change of that. I think it's very important to work with those teachers that want to do or want to start a change, and then you can grow this group bigger and bigger until you have as much as you need. Martin, do you want to add something, or is Juana the next one who can ask a question?
Maybe I could make a comment.
Please.
I find the question from George very interesting. For me, promoting leadership is perhaps not as necessary as it might seem. Within the learning circle, I think the activities encourage teachers to reflect and to discuss, to have conversations early in the process with their colleagues. And that is influential. It builds collaboration. So we don't have to construct ourselves as leaders, but simply people who are willing to make those small steps of conversation, consultation, asking our colleagues, what do you think? This is leadership, but maybe it doesn't look like it.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Gracias.
So, Juana, you might be the next one who's got a hand raised.
Sí, muchas gracias. Gracias. Reciban un saludo fraterno desde México del maestro Alfonso Cepeda Salas, nuestro secretario general del Sindicato Nacional de Trabajadores de la Educación. Agradecer a la Internacional de la Educación por este espacio, felicitarlos nuevamente por este gran reto que han tomado y que es de beneficio para alumnos, para docentes y, por supuesto, para la sociedad en general. En México, al tener una nueva reforma educativa, se ha considerado a la evaluación formativa. Sin embargo, sigue concretándose, porque así está planteado en un acuerdo publicado en días pasados, se sigue concretando en evaluación sumativa, es decir, va a tener que haber una calificación al final. Contextualizando, en nuestro país es muy grande, la diversidad cultural, la diversidad étnica es bastante amplia, entonces se vuelve un reto para el docente al tener una gran cantidad de alumnos, estamos hablando entre 30, 40 o más alumnos por grupo, con varios grupos, entonces este tipo de evaluación realmente es un desafío. La pregunta es, ¿cómo generar nuevas prácticas en la evaluación formativa cuando la tradición ha sido la evaluación sumativa, porque los docentes así fuimos formados y así hemos estado trabajando durante todo este tiempo? ¿Cómo han podido lograr que realmente el docente esté convencido y tenga las herramientas para cambiar sus prácticas en este aspecto de la evaluación formativa? Muchas gracias.
I would like to hand over this question to either Martin or David. You've got an overview from different countries, and just to summarize it briefly for her, if you want to, I can add something from Switzerland, but you might have some more insight to that.
Thanks, Selena. I appreciate it. And thanks, Juana. It's an interesting question. And we have to position assessment within every culture according to the choices that are being made. Ultimately, we've made the steps into formative assessment because we felt that summative assessment is being used in too much of a controlling way in many systems. So that there is a very big impact of standardized assessments and the way they're operating in terms of the pressure that they're putting on teachers. We know that in Mexico, you're working hard on teacher professional autonomy and issues of teacher identity and connectivity. And we know, because of the work we've done with you at the ILO and elsewhere, about the importance of having a digital basket for every teacher and the things that you're doing to try and open up these questions of evaluation. Ultimately, what this project is about is saying that the evaluation that a teacher does in the way they speak to a student every day, that relational glue that they have around the learning that the student is going through, is of critical importance. And because this is at primary school, we want to make sure that all teachers at primary school are working in that way. But the same applies for secondary schools too. David, you might want to come in as well, but it's a very difficult question and there's no perfect answer. We know that curriculum and assessment are the two most important things in a teacher's life, apart, of course, from the union, which we would all agree with.
Can I just add that I think teacher leadership is really important here in terms of reform. So we all work in our own systems and we are all constrained by the traditions and the expectations of governments. But when we see a project like this, where we have teachers in many different kinds of countries telling stories about the value of what they have done in formative assessment, that inspires other teachers. And I believe that over the next few years, we will see those inspirational stories coming out. And others in other countries will say, we should try this. And there's a bottom-up pressure and policymakers are going to have to listen when teachers themselves show them how practice can be developed and show them the results in pupils' learning.
If I can just come back in, Selena, and I know that it's really hard when you're facilitating a session to read the chat as well, but just what Peter and Hemmer have been saying in the chat also speaks to this issue. And David's absolutely right. We're talking about teacher leadership here, So as Selena said, she's gone back into her school and she's done some leadership work around engaging people with this form of assessment. We're not talking here about a system we want delivered to teachers. We want the teachers to do the delivering. And we've also got Hema in South Africa, who we've been working with, asking the same question. This has got to be centered on the teacher. I do want to get you to encourage Selena as well. Yuri, who has got a question there in the chat, if she wants to ask it, we've got the Korean interpreter has given us an English version, but we also have another Korean, and it would be, they can speak because we have an interpreter. So I'd invite them to.
Yuri, if you want to ask your question and then it can be interpreted, otherwise I'm going to just translate it into English. All right. I can't hear anything. The question, oh, I think, yeah.
안녕하세요. 저는 한국의 제주도에 사는 교사 김유리라고 하는데요. 저는 어쨌든 이게 교사가 리더십을 가지고 실천을 한다는 건 어쨌든 학생들에게 어떤 변화를 이루어내고 싶다라는 그런 가치가 있기 때문이라고 생각을 해요. 그래서 발표를 들으면서 조금 아쉬웠던 점이 실은 제가 어떤 세계적인 문화나 이런 걸 잘 모르기 때문에 어떤 배경을 가지고 이런 학교는 이런 문화적인 맥락과 이런 배경을 가지고 있어서 이런 의도를 가지고 이런 형성평가를 고민했다. 이런 부분들이 실은 조금 궁금했어요. 그래서 이런 형성평가를 우리 친구들에게 필요했다. 또는 우리 학급 상황에 필요했다. 이런 것을 한번 여쭤보고 싶었습니다.
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can chip in. And I can see these questions coming at you, Selena. Like, not everybody here plays cricket, but it's like a very fast ball going towards your head, as John Bangs would say. And ultimately, I think it's a really important question that we need to be clear that how a teacher works in response to their students is at the center of the work we're doing here. And ultimately, we're looking to measure evaluation in terms of our understanding of student learning, as opposed to against other rubrics. And I know the situation in Korea, you have a lot of evaluation. So we're not trying to add more evaluation to a system that already is heavy with evaluation. We're actually trying to make some space for you to be able to focus on the evaluation, which is really important. That's the conversation with the student about where they're at, not the tool you've got from the local authority or from the government that says every student must be at this level. And it was really interesting because in Brazil, the teachers there were talking about the impact of COVID and students coming out of COVID where they had really low literacy and numeracy, the same problem in Cote d'Ivoire, and actually needing to work in a different way in order to lift the students up. And I think that we've all got to be realistic about where our students are. I've said enough.
And just to give you some context, obviously I can just speak for myself and some part of Switzerland. I work with 20 kids. I teach them for 3 years in every subject. So they're with me 5 days a week, morning and afternoon. So I still see them more than, sometimes I see them more than their parents actually. And I've got just plenty of time to assess them and talk to them. And I know that there are school systems where you can see your kids or your pupils maybe 1, 2, 3 lessons a week. And that's a completely different setting then. So I advise you to find some form of formative assessment that just works for you, for your school, for your kids, and maybe some teachers as well. Because comparing maybe your system from South Korea to Switzerland to Mexico, that's just not possible. Because in Switzerland, just giving a context, just 8 million people, we've got 26 different states and none works the same as the other one, and we're just 8 million people. So don't be too harsh on yourself and try to compare yourself and your formative assessment to different schools, to different countries. Find your way and then you'll make it work. I have another statement from Peter. I don't know whether that's the one you talked about before, Martin, but Peter says it's just another thing to do, another task we have to do. I find if you trust yourself a bit more as a teacher and you find your systems that is not just ticking a box and trying to make formative assessment on paper, if you trust your guts a bit more, then you find, or you can see that that's what we're doing all day long. We talk to the kids, we give them feedback, we just have a conversation back and forth, and that's basically formative assessment all day long. So I understand your struggles. I hope that some of you have it better. We have to do quite a lot of administrative tasks as well, but I hope you find your way. Let me just have a quick look into the chat. If someone else has a question, you can still raise your hand. Yeah, I've got a statement in the chat. Teachers to be agents of change in the classroom, but many resist. I feel you. I feel you, and I've mentioned it before, work with those who don't resist. And if you're more teachers that don't resist, and you can grow your group of those teachers who think alike, who knows? We're not going to change a system in a year or two, but maybe next generation, we'll see. Yes, please, another question from South Korea.
Okay, this is another question. This is just a comment. So, you know, the one of the, okay, can you hear me now, Martin? Okay, one of the additional advantages of this EI project, this is my personal thought, is that it gives us time to think about the teacher leadership, as you mentioned many times. So we need a teacher leadership, not only for the formative assessment, but for every aspect in the education sector. So we need teacher leadership. So we need to think whether we teachers are treated as a leader in a classroom and in school, in community, or in society. We have to think about that, especially from the government, the Ministry of Education. Ministry of Education treated us as a leader in school, in education. Unfortunately, from my 25 years of teaching experience, the government, they didn't treat us as a leader, just that they try to control. So they try to silence the teacher's voice. That's why we need unity. We need the unified voice in to develop our teacher leadership. So I think that this is really important. So teachers, we need to let our voice be heard in society, in our nation as well. So thank you.
Thank you for your comment. I'm not fully up to date what's going on in the chat. Maybe, Martin, you can help me. Is there another question I have missed?
Yeah, Joel has his hand up.
Yeah.
Joel, we need to close now. So if you can be brief, we'll make this the final question. So Joel, over to you. We don't hear you, Joel. So okay, Selena, you can wrap up now because we're in the final minutes.
Okay. Well, I think we could go on for hours and hours. We could talk for about so many things from all the countries, but I very much appreciate all of your questions, all of your insights, and who knows, maybe we talk again soon, maybe we can collaborate in some form or another, and I'm happy to have held this webinar and to have had all your questions, and thank you, Martin and David, for this opportunity. I wish you all a very nice evening, afternoon, morning, wherever you are, and keep on doing your good work.
And we'd like to thank you, Selena, who is new to the international scene, and I think she's done a fantastic job of leading us through these questions and this way of thinking. You've really opened our mind to some of the issues that are going on in classrooms. And if I think about kids assessing kids, kids assessing themselves, and me assessing the kids, I'm going to have that triptych in my head now. And from all of you, the things that you've talked about that bring the classroom in to the work that we do, it's of absolute critical importance. So I'd like to thank you all for your participation from Education International, for your involvement, and for the work of our unions in making sure that they bring this work to life. And I'd like to thank David and his team, who've provided expert guidance in the world of teacher leadership. And I'd ask you all to watch out for the podcasts, which are coming at the end of this week. You'll be able to hear me and Selena and Robert and others chewing over some of these issues, as well as our first ever Portuguese podcast. And we will be making a Korean one when we get to Korea as well. So you can expect to see some of our Korean teachers who are on this webinar having another go to actually explore some of these questions. I think that the quality of the speakers, I just want to finish on. The speakers we've had here, Selena was leading the line and did so with absolute gusto. We saw from Vignesh a very clear portrait of what's happening in Malaysia, and he opened up some questions for us, which I have rattling around my brain. And I would encourage any of you involved in teacher leadership who want to write a blog to get in touch with us, with me or with our owner. You can get our email addresses via the email contact that you have. I'd like to thank Ruth for persevering and giving us a very clear breakdown of what is happening in Ghana and how she's been able to use assessment forms in a different way. And I'd like to thank Hyunok for opening up some really important questions about the way that assessment works within a context of many assessments. And I do want to mention the very difficult time they've had in Korea, with teachers being under a lot of pressure recently, and for the important support that they've got from their unions in the work they've done around this. And thanks to all of you for coming along and for taking part and for being such active participants. So thanks very much, and we will see you the next time.
Thank you.